"You should have just knocked." That was the last transmission the Galactic Dominion ever received from Earth. By then, it was already too late. The invasion began with the arrogance of an empire that had never been refused. The Dominion had expanded across the stars for centuries, absorbing or annihilating civilizations without a second thought. They arrived in orbit above Earth with the same confidence, a fleet of gleaming warships ready to establish their rule. They expected surrender. They got silence. When their diplomats broadcast demands for submission, Earth did not respond. When they issued ultimatums, the radio waves remained empty. They deployed atmospheric drones, scanning the surface for resistance. What they found were humans, moving with purpose, but not fear. No panic, no disarray. Just millions of people carrying on as if the end of their world was nothing more than an afternoon rainstorm. The first ships descended over major cities, weapons primed. Their orders were simple: fire upon any structure emitting signals that did not comply. They opened fire on a radio tower in New York. The tower fell, but the city did not. Within minutes, strange signals flooded the Dominion's communications. Jamming? No, worse. The humans had cracked their encryption. In an instant, their own fleet was now shouting conflicting orders, alarms blaring. And as ships turned against each other, it was the first sign that they had made a mistake. Then the sky burned. Surface-to-orbit missiles streaked up from silos the invaders hadn't detected. Hypersonic warheads tore through their lower formations before their shields could react. The Dominion's fleet, built for conquest, had never encountered an enemy that refused to kneel. Within the first hour, they lost a third of their ships. They tried deploying ground troops. It was an even greater mistake. The soldiers landed in cities expecting chaos. Instead, they found humans waiting for them, not with fear, but with something else entirely. Readiness. Buildings that looked like civilian infrastructure concealed automated defenses. Streets turned into kill zones. And the people, ordinary men with rifles, veterans with practiced hands, and soldiers with centuries of war in their blood, fought as if surrender had never been an option. The Dominion had underestimated them. Humans were not prey. They were not subjects. They were something else entirely. The invaders sent their elites, their most advanced warriors, clad in armor that had seen 100 battles on 100 worlds. They expected the humans to break. Instead, they met a man named Ramos, his rifle, worn but steady. He had no enhancements, no armor that could deflect plasma. He had something far more dangerous: experience. When the Dominion's warriors charged, they fell, one by one, to a soldier who had once fought wars over land and politics, now fighting for the only thing that ever truly mattered: his home. Across the world, stories like his played out. A pilot named Hayes, flying a jet that should have been obsolete, weaved through energy blasts and turned entire enemy squadrons into flaming wreckage. A commander named Orloff orchestrated defences with the precision of a master chess player, turning what should have been an overwhelming assault into a bloodbath for the enemy. A scientist named Liu, working in a hidden bunker, turned captured Dominion technology against its makers, corrupting their systems from within. The invaders had come expecting to pacify a primitive world. Instead, they found a species that had been fighting itself for millennia, one that had never known an era without war, one that had perfected survival in the face of impossible odds. And then came the message. You should have asked first. It was not a plea. It was not a negotiation. It was a warning. The Dominion, bleeding and desperate, tried to retreat. But there was no escape. Human forces had captured their communication relays. They had cracked the codes for their warp gates. They had taken the Dominion's own weapons and turned them inward. One by one, the warships fell. One by one, their generals were silenced. And as Earth's defences expanded beyond the planet, as human warships, built from stolen technology, began hunting down the stragglers, it became clear. The Dominion had made a fatal mistake. They had started a war with the wrong species. The Dominion's retreat was a disaster. The Great Armada that had arrived above Earth with the weight of 1,000 conquests now scattered like frightened prey, their ships breaking formation in desperate attempts to flee. But there was nowhere to go. Humanity had learned fast, too fast. Within days, captured Dominion vessels had been reverse-engineered, their technology dissected and repurposed. What once belonged to the invaders was now turned against them. Their encrypted channels, thought to be impenetrable, were now open books. Their weapons, designed to cow civilizations into submission, had been modified and improved by engineers who had spent lifetimes designing machines of war. And then there were the warships. At first, the Dominion assumed that Earth's fleet consisted only of outdated, primitive vessels, laughable attempts at space warfare. But as their retreating forces jumped to nearby systems, they found human ships waiting. And they were not primitive. The Goliath was the first of its kind, a behemoth constructed in record time from the shattered hulls of Dominion wreckage. Its fusion cannons, once an experiment on human battlegrounds, now cut through Dominion hulls as if they were paper. The Black Lance, a smaller, faster craft, struck with terrifying precision, ambushing fleeing Dominion ships before they could send distress signals. There was no reprieve. The Dominion had believed themselves unmatched in space. Humanity had proven them wrong. The battles that followed were not wars. They were executions. On the surface of Mars, where the Dominion had established a forward base to regroup, a fleet of newly christened human warships arrived. The battle was over before it began. Long-range railguns cracked the sky, firing projectiles at near-light speeds, tearing through command centres before Dominion officers could react. Drop pods rained down, and men like Ramos, men who had spent their entire lives fighting, pushed through the burning wreckage without hesitation. Resistance was met with cold, unrelenting destruction. The Dominion's ground troops, bred for conquest, found themselves outmatched. They had never fought an enemy who adapted faster than they could respond. Energy weapons that once cut through lesser species with ease now faltered against improvised countermeasures. Dominion elites, whose armour was thought impenetrable, discovered, too late, that human snipers had found the gaps in their plating. One by one, Dominion officers issued the only command left: surrender. But surrender was no longer an option. Humanity was not content with mere victory. This was not just a war. It was revenge. Across the galaxy, Dominion governors, once untouchable, received terrifying reports. Entire fleets were vanishing. Worlds they had subjugated were now burning, not from rebellion, but from something far worse. The humans had arrived, not as conquerors, not as diplomats, as executioners. On the Dominion-controlled planet of Vore, a governor watched in horror as human warships descended through the clouds, unchallenged. His defences, once thought insurmountable, had been bypassed as if they were mere inconveniences. The human fleet did not stop to negotiate. They did not offer terms. The bombardment began within seconds. It was systematic, brutal. The Dominion's capital city was reduced to rubble in minutes. Its military command centres, once thought untouchable, were obliterated before the Dominion forces could even scramble their fighters. Those who tried to flee were met with a final message, broadcast across every surviving screen, spoken in a voice that carried no emotion, only judgment. You should have asked first. And then the world burned. The Dominion, for all its centuries of conquest, had never faced an enemy like this. They had seen rebellion, resistance, defiance, but never retribution. They had awakened something they could not contain. The retreating remnants of their once mighty fleet gathered in a system far from Earth, desperately trying to regroup. Their commanders whispered among themselves, struggling to comprehend what had happened. How could a single planet, a world they had dismissed as insignificant, have turned the tide so? The answer was simple. Humanity had never been prey. It had simply been waiting for a predator foolish enough to challenge it. The Dominion Supreme Commander, an officer who had once led the annihilation of entire species without hesitation, now stood in silence, staring at a display of their dwindling forces. He could not understand it. The humans had been nothing, a backwater species, a world without empire, without fleets stretching across the stars. And yet the Dominion was losing. Number they had already lost. Their only chance was escape. If even one Dominion vessel could make it beyond the war front, if a single ship could vanish into the void, perhaps they could rebuild. Perhaps they could one day return. But even as the order to flee was issued, the Dominion fleet's sensors flickered with a new signal. They were not alone. A human fleet had already arrived. There was no warning, no declaration of battle, no demands, just silence. And then the killing began. The Dominion fleet never had a chance. Their ships, once the terror of 1,000 worlds, were now prey. The humans struck without hesitation, without wasted movement, without mercy. The Goliath led the charge, its railguns spitting death at near-light speeds, tearing through Dominion cruisers like they were made of glass. The Blacklands darted between wreckage, targeting engines, communications relays, anything that could keep the enemy from running. The Dominion Supreme Commander, watching from the bridge of his last remaining battleship, could not comprehend what he was seeing. How had it come to this? The humans were everywhere. Fighter squadrons patched together from stolen Dominion technology and human ingenuity, weaved through enemy lines like they had been born in space. They were fast, unpredictable, their movements erratic in ways Dominion pilots couldn't counter. Ships blinked out of existence in explosions of fire and metal, torn apart by weapons that the humans had improved in mere weeks, a feat that should have been impossible. The Supreme Commander gave the only order left: scatter. The remaining Dominion ships broke formation, engines burning as they attempted to flee in every direction. It was a desperate move, one that had worked before against lesser enemies. A fractured pursuit would mean some of them would survive. But humanity had learned every lesson the Dominion had failed to realize. Within moments, the fleet's broken formation became a hunting ground. A squadron of human fighters, moving with impossible synchronization, intercepted the first escape group. Missiles, primitive by Dominion standards, found their marks with terrifying efficiency. Warships that had once crushed entire planetary defenses were now being hunted like animals. The Supreme Commander's own ship, once the jewel of the Dominion Navy, was next. Warning sirens screamed as railgun rounds punched through the hull. Crew members scrambled, shouting over each other, trying to find an exit, a way out, anything. But there was no escape. A human transmission, crystal clear, cut through the panic. You should have asked first. And then, from the void, a single kinetic projectile, fired from a human warship far beyond visible range, ended the Dominion's leadership in an instant. The flagship exploded from the inside out, metal and bodies scattering into the abyss. The Dominion had no leader now, no fleet, no future. Yet humanity was not done. The war had started with an invasion. Now it was a pursuit. Earth was no longer content with survival. It was time for eradication. The war did not end with the destruction of the Dominion's leadership. That was only the beginning of the final phase, the hunt. Across the galaxy, Dominion colonies that had once basked in their empire's protection now found themselves exposed. The humans did not come as conquerors. They did not land troops to occupy, nor did they demand tribute. They eliminated. Human warships swept through Dominion space like a storm of fire, striking without warning, without hesitation. No world was spared. No fleet was left untouched. They did not negotiate. They did not offer peace. The Dominion had never extended mercy to the species they had crushed beneath their rule, and now, for the first time in their history, they faced an enemy that treated them the same way. Planets that had once been strongholds of the Empire burned in the darkness of space, their atmospheres turned to choking wastelands by precision bombardments. The Dominion's last defenders fought desperately, but it was hopeless. Their weapons, once so advanced, were outdated. Their strategies, once unstoppable, were countered before they could be deployed. The humans had taken everything the Dominion had built over centuries, technology, tactics, battle formations, and made them better. It was no longer a war. It was a cleansing. And then the final world fell. The Dominion's last colony, a world known as Old Vacus, had prepared for what was coming. They had built defences in desperation, had tried to send messages pleading for mercy. None were answered. The human fleet arrived, and the bombardment began immediately. Shield generators collapsed in minutes. Defensive cannons were turned into craters before they could fire a single shot. Dominion civilians, who had once cheered as their warriors crushed weaker species, now ran in terror. There was nowhere to hide. There was no escape. And then, as the planet's core split and its skies became fire, the last Dominion stronghold ceased to exist. The war was over. But humanity had changed. They had gone from defenders to something far greater, something far more terrifying. Earth was no longer a world struggling to survive in an uncaring galaxy. It was now the greatest power the stars had ever seen. And the message that had started it all would forever remain the only warning they would ever give. You should have asked first.